Today we're going to talk about organic molecules, which are kind of the major types of molecules that make up living things. Carbon is used as the backbone for organic molecules, and it happens to be very good at this because it has 4 valence electrons and it needs 8 to be happy, so it's very good at forming strong covalent bonds with other atoms, and it's able to form single, double, and triple bonds. Many organic molecules can be macromolecules. Macro just means very large, right? So macromolecules are giant molecules. They're made of many smaller molecules that are bonded together. A monomer is a small molecule, so it's a single molecule. And if you have more than one monomer that are all joined together in a chain, you get a polymer. So a polymer is a large molecule made of monomers that are all joined together. The major types of organic molecules are carbohydrates, lipids, nucleic acids, and proteins. So we'll talk about each of those in detail. We're going to start with carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are also known as sugars, and the chemical formula for a carbohydrate is always going to be carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And in this image, you can see a basic sugar. So this is a glucose molecule. You can see that it's a chain of carbons. So like here's a carbon, here's a carbon, here's a carbon, and those are all carbons. And then it's also made of oxygen and hydrogens, right? And sugars are often this ring shape. And sometimes there's a 6-carbon sugar like this one is, or you can also have sugars that are made of 5 carbons. The monomer for a carbohydrate is called a monosaccharide. So mono means one and saccharide means sugar. And so a monosaccharide is a single sugar molecule. There are some different types of monosaccharides that you can find in the world. Glucose is one of them. Glucose is very common, and glucose is the type of sugar that our human bodies use to transport sugar from our digestive system and then to our cells to use as fuel. So humans have a lot of glucose in their bodies, and glucose is the sugar you test for if you're diabetic and you need to have your blood sugar tested. Another type of monosaccharide is galactose, and fructose is another one. So these are all very common sugars. Galactose is found in milk, fructose is found in fruit, but you'll see that they are all single sugars or monosaccharides. If you take 2 sugars and bond them together, then you get a disaccharide. So di, the prefix means 2, and then saccharide again means sugar. So a disaccharide is 2 sugar molecules bonded together through something called the dehydration synthesis. And so in this picture you can see that you've got 2 sugars. Here we have a glucose and a fructose. And if you bond them together, they produce a water molecule. That's why it's a dehydration, because a water molecule leaves. And then you get this whole molecule here. This is a sucrose molecule, and it's made of a glucose molecule bonded directly to a fructose molecule. And it's a disaccharide because it's made of 2 sugars. So another example of a disaccharide is lactose, which is a disaccharide found in milk. And then one that is in the picture is sucrose. That's table sugar. So if you've baked cookies or you have purchased that white sugar at the grocery store, what you're buying is sucrose. You can also have carbohydrates that are polysaccharides. The prefix poly means many, and saccharide means sugar. So when you have a polysaccharide, you have many sugars bonded together. There are several examples of polysaccharides. Starch is one. If you've ever eaten a potato or a banana and you've seen the interior of either of those things and it's kind of that whitish color, that is starch. So starch is a long chain of glucose molecules that looks like this. And it's not soluble in water, which is why plants use it to store sugar. Because if you put a potato in water, the potato does not dissolve, right? It just gets softer. That's different than if you put sucrose, the disaccharide, in water, right? When you put sucrose in water, you can stir it and then it dissolves. So polysaccharides are a better way to store sugars for a long time because they're more stable and not soluble in water. Another type of polysaccharide is glycogen. This is how our bodies store sugar. Glycogen is also a polysaccharide, but it's formed and stored in your liver, and then your body can release that sugar if you need it in your blood to go to your cells. And then another type of polysaccharide that's found in plants is cellulose. Cellulose is not soluble in water, and it's very strong. Cellulose is what like the wood in trees is made out of. What's what we make paper out of. So cellulose is a structural thing. It's one of the things that makes up insoluble fiber in the food that we eat too. So like the stemmy part of a green bean, for example, is cellulose. When we eat carbohydrates, we don't eat a whole lot of monosaccharides, but we'd adjust our sugars down to monosaccharides. So we eat a lot of disaccharides and polysaccharides. So disaccharides we eat include things like table sugar from baking, fruit that we eat, and polysaccharides are found in whole grains and leafy vegetables and greens and things like that. The next type of molecule we're going to look at are lipids. We're going to look at 4 different types of lipids. So one of those types are solid fats. Those are used for storage. So we store those in our adipose tissue in cells that sometimes people call them fat cells, and that's how we cushion our organs and insulate our bodies so we just stay warm and things like that. We also produce oils. Those produce or protect our hair and our skin. And we have waxes protecting hair, skin, and our ears, like earwax, for example, is a lipid that your body produces. And then we also are full of steroids, which act as hormones. So those are chemical messengers that your body uses to send messages from one area of your body to another. One of the most common lipids in our body is a triglyceride, and that's what is pictured here. It has a glycerol molecule, that's the one that's kind of this periwinkle blue color, and then it has 3 fatty acid chains, which are here. And this type of molecule is used for storage most of the time and cushioning of our organs. So it's found in our adipose tissue underneath our skin and around our organs. So fats can come in either saturated or unsaturated fats. Saturated fats have all of the carbon bonds full. So that means they have all single bonds. Unsaturated fats have double bonds. So single bonds cause the fats generally to be solids at room temperature. So examples of saturated fats are things like butter or lard, which are solid when they're at room temperature. Unsaturated fats typically have double bonds, which causes them to be liquids at room temperature. So they're things like olive oil or canola oil. And you can see the difference in the picture. So the saturated fat, you'll notice that it's all single bonds between the carbons, right? When you look at the unsaturated fat, notice that there's a double bond between at least 2 of the carbons, and that causes the fat to be unsaturated and a liquid at room temperature. Steroids are another type of lipid that's found in your body. They look very different from triglycerides. They act as hormones, which are chemical messengers, so they're produced in tissue in your body, endocrine tissue, and it makes hormones, and then those hormones are released from that tissue and they go to other tissues and have an effect. So some examples of steroids are like androstenedione, testosterone, or estradiol. So those are all steroids that happen to impact things like secondary sex characteristics. But there's many different types of hormones, like adrenaline is another type of hormone. Usually that's actually called epinephrine. And they all have this characteristic 4-ring structure. So you can see that they have 4 rings that are all connected to each other, and that's how you know it's a steroid. You do eat lipids, right? So there's different sources of saturated fat. Those are typically things like butter and other animal products. So things like meat and stuff all have saturated fats. And then unsaturated fats include things like vegetable oils, nuts, avocado, and things like that. So those are all fatty plant products. Now we're going to talk about nucleic acids. So a nucleic acid is found in the nucleus. That's why it's called a nucleic acid to start anyway. Remember, the nucleus is inside of your cells, and they're not all found there, but your DNA, which is one of the major nucleic acids, is, which is how they got their name. A nucleic acid is usually a polymer, so that means, again, it's one of those long chains of molecules. The monomer of a nucleic acid is called a nucleotide. So one long polymer of nucleic acid is made of many nucleotides. So an example would be DNA, right? It has many nucleotides to make a long chain. Examples of nucleic acids include DNA, which is genetic information, RNA, which helps with protein synthesis, and ATP, which is a molecule in your cells that helps to transfer chemical energy and help chemical reactions occur. So as we said before, a nucleotide is the monomer of a nucleic acid, and it's made of 3 parts. So it's made of a sugar, a phosphate, and a base. And so you can see what that looks like here, right? The sugar is usually a 5-carbon sugar, it's a ribose sugar, and then there's always a phosphate group and a nitrogen-containing base. And you can see what they look like here and what atoms are involved. So the phosphate group always contains this phosphorus molecule, and then there's the sugar, and then the base always contains nitrogen. You can see there's a lot of nitrogen in those bases. There's 5 different nucleotides that are found in the human body, and they are adenine, guanine, thymine, cytosine, and uracil, and they're often abbreviated by their first letter. So cytosine is C, uracil is U, thymine is T, guanine is G, and adenine is abbreviated with A. Proteins are the final organic molecule we need to talk about, and proteins are also made of monomers. The monomer for protein is an amino acid. So amino acids are the building blocks of protein, and they contain an amine group, which is this group of atoms, and N and 2 H's, so nitrogen and 2 hydrogens. They also contain a carboxyl group or an acid group, and that's the COOH group. And then an amino acid is bonded together to other amino acids to form a polypeptide. So that's the name of a polymer in a protein. So if you have these long chains of amino acids that go on for a long time, each of these little dots or circles is an amino acid. That makes a polypeptide. Proteins can have a simple structure that becomes more complex. So the structure of a protein is determined by the order of the amino acids that are determined by the DNA. So that means that you can have, there's 20 different amino acids in the human body, and they can be put in different orders to make different proteins. Kind of like how we put words in different orders to make different sentences. So the primary structure of a protein is the amino acid sequence. So when you put amino acids in a specific order, you have the primary structure of a protein. Once you have the amino acids in order, then you can start to form the secondary structure. So proteins can twist and form these alpha helices, or they can fold and form these beta pleated sheets. So that's the secondary structure. The next level of organization is called the tertiary structure, and that is when you can make the proteins into a 3-dimensional shape that are made of both the pleated sheets and the alpha helices. And then if you take more than one polypeptide chain that has been folded, you can make the quaternary structure. And so that's usually made of multiple polypeptide chains, and then they're bonded together with hydrogen bonds to make the quaternary structure of the final protein. So once the protein has reached its quaternary structure, that is the shape that it has when it is functional and can do a job, like act as an enzyme. Proteins are also an important part of our diet, much like carbohydrates and lipids are. Nucleic acids we can synthesize on our own, so we don't need to get them from food, but proteins we can't synthesize every single kind we need. And so proteins have to come sometimes from our diet. And so animal protein sources include meat, dairy, so like fish, chicken, beef, all that sort of thing contain protein. And then there's also sources of plant protein, including like nuts and seeds, some types of grain, and beans and legumes.